My husband Alex and I bought our first house after saving for 5 years. It was a 3-bedroom ranch with original hardwood floors and this amazing sunroom where I put all my plants. I spent months picking out furniture and paint colors and making everything exactly how I wanted it. We had Alex's family over every Sunday for dinner, and his sister Dina would always show up late with her husband Roy, who owned a chain of gyms. They lived in this huge colonial across town that probably cost 3 times what ours did. Dina never said she liked our house, but she'd walk around studying everything like she was memorizing it. When we had our housewarming party, Dina spent the whole time taking notes in her phone. She measured my couch with her hands. She took the cushions off to check the brand. She asked where every single thing came from and how much it cost. I thought she was judging our cheap furniture, but she kept saying everything was adorable. 2 weeks later, Dina called, insisting we come for dinner. I walked into her living room and stopped dead. She had the exact same couch as us, but in Italian leather. Same color, though, the exact sage green. Same throw pillows, but embroidered. Same coffee table, but marble instead of wood. Same lamp from Target, but she bought 6. Even the same wall color, which was this specific green-gray I'd custom mixed at the paint store. Alex laughed and said imitation was flattery, but I felt violated. Dina walked us through the house, pointing out everything. She'd copied my bathroom rug, but got it in Egyptian cotton. She'd bought my exact dining chairs, but had them reupholstered in velvet. She'd stolen my kitchen backsplash pattern, but used handmade tiles from Italy. Every single thing was mine, but more expensive. Roy kept bragging about how much everything cost, while Dina pretended she came up with it all herself. A month later, my mom visited from Florida and brought me these vintage plates from an estate sale. They were white with tiny blue flowers and gold edges, probably from the 60s. I hung them on the dining room wall in this pattern I saw in a magazine years ago. I posted one photo online because my mom wanted to see them displayed. 3 days later, Dina called, demanding the estate sale information. I told her it was a one-time thing in Florida and the plates were unique. That weekend, Dina showed up with plates she'd commissioned from an artist to look identical. Except hers were a full set of 24, and she added matching teacups. She hung them exactly like mine, but hired someone to install professional museum lighting. This became her pattern. I got a bird feeder, Dina built a heated bird sanctuary. I planted tomatoes, Dina installed a greenhouse. I put up fairy lights. Dina had an electrician wire permanent fixtures with an app to control them. I painted an accent wall navy. Dina flew in a painter from New York to do the same color with gold leafing. I refinished a thrift store dresser in butter yellow. Dina had a furniture maker build her one for $9,000. She'd invite everyone over for tours and stand there explaining her design choices like she invented them. She'd describe my exact color combinations as her personal discovery. She'd show off my furniture arrangements and call them her signature style. Her friends would compliment her creativity while she absorbed the praise for my ideas. Alex told me to be flattered, but I was furious. She was stealing my creativity and buying herself credit for it. The final straw was when I made these macrame plant hangers after watching tutorials online for weeks. Dina saw them and immediately hired someone to make her dozens in silk rope with crystal beads woven in. She told everyone at Thanksgiving that macrame was her new passion, and she'd been practicing for months. That's when I decided to destroy her house without touching it. I started leaving design magazines around when Dina visited, but I'd doctor them first. I'd circle the ugliest things and write notes like perfect or must have now. Zebra print wallpaper, chrome furniture shaped like animals, carpets that looked like grass. Dina photographed every single page. Then I bought the most hideous lamp ever created at a garage sale. It was a 3-foot pineapple wearing pink sunglasses with a hula skirt for a shade. I put it in our entrance and told everyone it was from a famous artist who died. I made up a whole story about how his work was in museums. Dina spent 3 weeks hunting down the seller and paid him $800 to make her a custom 6-foot version with real palm fronds. For phase 2, I painted one wall in the basement the most disgusting orange possible, like hazard cone meets baby puke. I told Dina it was a discontinued color called Tuscan Sunrise that designers were hoarding. She painted her entire first floor that color. The masterpiece was when I told Dina about my secret renovation project. I showed her a vision board covered in circus and clown pictures. I said it was for a meditation room because clowns represented pure joy in Buddhist philosophy. I made up quotes from fake design gurus. I even created a fake invoice for a 20-foot clown statue I'd supposedly ordered from Japan. Dina spent $40,000 turning her basement into a circus hellscape. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Full-sized clown statue from Japan cost $40,000, and Dina invited everyone over for a holiday party to show it off. I stood in the back of her basement with my phone out, recording every single reaction. The basement looked worse in person than I'd even imagined it would. She had circus posters covering every wall, like the kind you'd see at an actual carnival with tigers jumping through fire rings and acrobats hanging from trapezes. She'd hung streamers in red and yellow stripes from the ceiling so the whole room felt like you were standing inside a big top tent. The furniture was all painted in primary colors, bright reds and blues and yellows that hurt to look at under the track lighting she'd installed. There were clown paintings everywhere, not just one or two, but at least a dozen of them in different sizes. One was 6 feet tall and showed a clown with a tear painted on his face holding balloons. Catalina stood in front of that one for a long time, just staring at it with this look on her face like she was trying to figure out if it was a joke. Dina walked around the room with her arms spread wide, explaining to everyone how clowns represented pure joy in Buddhist philosophy, and how she'd been researching meditation spaces for months. She kept using words like enlightenment and inner peace while gesturing at a poster of a clown riding a unicycle. Her face was glowing, absolutely beaming with pride like she'd created something revolutionary. I zoomed in on Catalina's expression as Dina explained the spiritual significance of circus imagery. Catalina's mouth was doing this weird thing where it looked like she wanted to smile to be polite but couldn't quite make it happen. Other people were nodding along, but their eyes kept darting around the room like they were looking for hidden cameras. Someone asked where she got the idea, and Dina launched into this whole story about discovering an article by a famous designer who used clown imagery in high-end homes. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing because I'd made up that designer completely, invented his whole biography and everything. Roy found me by the stairs and pulled me aside, away from the main group. He put his hand on my shoulder and thanked me for inspiring Dina's meditation space. He said she'd been so excited about this project, more excited than he'd seen her about anything in years. I nodded and made some comment about how unique it was. Roy told me the clown statue from Japan cost $12,000 and wouldn't arrive for another month because it was being custom made by an artist. He pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of it. This massive thing that looked like it belonged in a horror movie, not a meditation room. The statue was 20 feet tall with arms spread wide and this massive grin painted on its face. Roy said they'd have to reinforce the basement ceiling to hang it properly. He was so proud of how much money they were spending, kept emphasizing the $12,000 like it proved something. I felt this weird mix of satisfaction and guilt sitting in my stomach. Part of me wanted to laugh at how completely I'd fooled them both. The other part was starting to realize that $12,000 was a lot of money to waste on a prank, even if Dina deserved it for all the copying. When I got home, Alex was already in bed reading. I climbed in next to him and pulled out my phone, showing him the video I'd taken. We watched Dina gesturing at the circus posters while her friends exchanged these uncomfortable glances behind her back. Alex laughed at first, actually laughed out loud at the part where Dina explained the Buddhist philosophy of clown meditation. But then he stopped laughing and looked at me with this weird expression. He asked if maybe I'd taken this too far. I felt myself getting defensive immediately. I reminded him that he'd spent months telling me to just ignore Dina's copying, to be flattered by it, to let it go. I said that he'd made me feel crazy for being upset about it in the first place. Alex put his phone down and said that was true. He had dismissed my feelings, but this felt different. He pointed at the screen where you could see the 6-foot clown painting in the background. He said that was cruel, not just revenge. I argued that Dina had been cruel first, stealing my ideas and taking credit for them in front of everyone. Alex said 2 wrongs didn't make a right, which made me want to throw my phone at him because that's what people say when they don't have a real argument. The next Sunday dinner at my parents' house was so awkward I wanted to leave within 5 minutes of arriving. Everyone had seen Dina's clown basement by now, either in person or through the photos she'd posted online. My mom kept giving me these looks across the table, these knowing looks like she could see right through me. She didn't say anything directly, but her eyes followed me every time I moved. My dad wouldn't even look at Dina during dinner. He focused on his plate and answered her questions with 1 or 2 words. When Dina tried to talk about her meditation space, he suddenly got very interested in passing the potatoes. Alex's parents were trying too hard to act normal, asking lots of questions about work and the weather and anything except the basement. Dina seemed oblivious to how weird everyone was acting. She showed everyone more pictures on her phone, zooming in on different clown paintings and explaining their spiritual significance. Roy nodded along and added details about how much each piece cost. I pushed food around my plate and tried not to make eye contact with anyone. My mom asked me to help her in the kitchen even though nothing needed help. As soon as we were alone, she looked at me and asked what I'd done. I tried to play innocent, but she just shook her head and said she knew me too well. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Catalina's voice came through. She didn't bother with small talk or hello. She asked me point blank if I'd told Dina that clowns were a design trend. I felt my heart start beating faster, but I kept my voice casual. I asked why she was asking. Catalina said she'd known Dina since college, had been her best friend for over 15 years, and had never once heard her mention clowns. She'd never mentioned Buddhism either, or meditation, or anything even close to spiritual philosophy. Catalina said the whole basement came out of nowhere, and it seemed completely random. I could hear the suspicion in her voice, the way she was choosing her words carefully. She said she'd been at my house before and noticed how Dina's living room looked almost identical to mine. She'd noticed the same dining chairs and the same paint colors. She'd thought it was weird at the time but hadn't said anything because it wasn't her business. I told Catalina that Dina must have discovered the clown trend on her own through research. My voice sounded fake even to me. Catalina went quiet for a long time. So long I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then she said she'd noticed how similar Dina's house looked to mine. She said it wasn't just one or two things, it was everything. The furniture arrangements, the color schemes, the decorative choices. She asked if Dina had been copying my house. My stomach dropped. Someone finally saw what had been happening. Someone finally noticed that Dina wasn't some creative genius but a copycat who stole other people's ideas. I wanted to tell Catalina everything right then. Wanted to explain the months of copying and the violation and the revenge. But I couldn't. If I admitted I'd tricked Dina into the clown basement, I'd have to admit I was capable of that level of manipulation. So I said something vague about how Dina and I had similar taste. Catalina made this sound like she didn't believe me at all. She said she was going to talk to Dina about it because something felt really off. 2 weeks passed and winter settled in hard. The light changed, got weaker and grayer, and that's when Dina called me. Her voice sounded desperate. She said the orange paint on her first floor looked even worse in winter light. She called it a contractor mistake, said the painter must have mixed the wrong shade. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that she'd picked the color herself after I'd told her it was discontinued and special. She asked for the name of my painter because she needed someone to fix it fast. She couldn't stand looking at the walls anymore. Every morning she woke up and the orange made her feel sick. I told her I'd text her a name. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and searched for painters with terrible reviews. I found one guy who had a 1-star rating and multiple complaints about uneven work and not showing up on time. People said he worked cheap and fast and did sloppy jobs. Perfect. I texted Dina his number. Dina hired him immediately. She called me 3 days later to say he'd start the next morning. A week after that, she called again and she was crying. The painter had made everything worse. He'd painted right over the orange without proper primer and the new color was streaky and uneven. You could see the orange bleeding through in patches. He'd gotten paint on her hardwood floors and hadn't cleaned it up properly. He'd left halfway through the job and wasn't returning her calls. Dina said her house was falling apart and she didn't know what to do. I made sympathetic sounds while feeling absolutely nothing inside except maybe a little bit of satisfaction. She asked if I knew anyone else who could fix it. I said I'd ask around. Alex came home from work that evening and I knew something was wrong by the way he closed the door. He didn't kiss me hello or ask about my day. He just stood in the kitchen and looked at me. He said Dina had called him crying about her house falling apart. The paint was a disaster. The basement looked ridiculous and she was spending thousands of dollars trying to fix everything. Alex asked me directly if I was somehow responsible. I could see in his eyes that he already knew the truth. He'd figured it out. Probably had been figuring it out for weeks. I thought about lying. But what was the point? He already knew. I admitted everything. The magazines with the circled ugly furniture. The pineapple lamp with the made-up artist story. The orange paint that I'd told her was discontinued. The clown room with the fake Buddhist philosophy and the invented design gurus. I even told him about the fake invoice for the 20-foot statue. Alex stared at me the whole time I was talking, and his expression changed from suspicious to shocked, to something I couldn't quite read. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he didn't recognize this version of me. He said the person who would spend months planning elaborate revenge on his sister wasn't someone he knew. Those words hurt more than I expected them to. I wanted him to understand why I'd done it, wanted him to see that Dina had driven me to this point. But looking at his face, I realized he saw me differently now, and I couldn't take that back. I slept on the couch that night because neither of us could stand being in the same bed. Alex didn't try to stop me when I grabbed a pillow and walked out of our bedroom. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how he'd looked at me like I was someone he didn't know. In the morning, he was already up making coffee when I came into the kitchen. We sat at the table and he started talking before I could. He said we needed to discuss what I'd done to Dina, and why I'd felt the need to hide it from him for months. I told him I'd tried talking to him about the copying back when it started, but he kept brushing me off. He kept saying it was flattery and I should be happy she liked my style. I explained how small and crazy that made me feel. Like my concerns didn't matter because he didn't want to deal with his sister's problems. Alex put his coffee down and rubbed his face with both hands. He admitted he knew Dina was copying me, but he didn't want to get involved in drama between us. He said confronting his sister about it would have meant acknowledging she had issues, and he took the easy way out by pretending it wasn't a big deal. That hurt to hear because it meant he'd seen what was happening and chose to ignore it anyway. Alex said he understood why I was angry, but what I'd done was cruel. He pointed out that Dina spent months copying my house while I spent months planning ways to destroy hers. I argued back that she stole my creativity and took credit for my ideas in front of everyone. She made people think she was this amazing designer when every single thing came from my brain. Alex countered that I deliberately sabotaged her mental state and tricked her into spending $40,000 on a clown basement. He said revenge and copying weren't the same thing, and I'd gone way too far. We went back and forth like that for an hour, both of us getting louder. I kept saying she violated me first, and he kept saying two wrongs don't make a right. Finally, we both just sat there exhausted and out of arguments. My phone rang later that afternoon, and it was my mom. She didn't even say hello, just asked if I was okay because she could tell something was wrong. I started crying right there in the kitchen while Alex watched from the doorway. Mom said I should come to Florida for a few days to get some space from everything. I booked a flight that same night, and Alex drove me to the airport without saying much. On the plane, I kept replaying the fight in my head and wondering if our marriage would survive this. Mom picked me up and took me straight to her porch where she'd already set out wine and glasses. I told her everything from the beginning. How Dina copied my couch and my plates and my paint colors. How she hired people to make expensive versions of everything I created. How Alex dismissed my feelings over and over until I felt invisible. How I'd planned the revenge with the magazines and the lamp and the orange paint and the clown room. Mom listened without interrupting and refilled my wine twice. When I finished talking, Mom was quiet for a minute. Then she said she understood why I was angry because having your creativity stolen is a real violation. But she asked me if the satisfaction of watching Dina suffer was worth what it might cost me. She pointed out that I'd risked my marriage and my relationship with Alex's entire family for revenge. She said revenge always costs more than you expect it to, because you can't control what happens after. You pull one thread, and the whole thing unravels in ways you didn't plan for. I sat there on her porch looking out at the palm trees, and realized she was right. The revenge had felt good in the moment, but now everything was falling apart. I'd hurt Dina worse than she hurt me, and I'd damaged Alex's trust in ways I didn't know how to fix. Mom squeezed my hand and said, "Sometimes we do things we're not proud of when we feel powerless." The question now was what I planned to do about it. I spent 3 days at Mom's house drinking wine and walking on the beach and thinking about what I'd done. The initial rush of satisfaction from watching Dina's house fall apart had faded into something uncomfortable. I felt guilty about how far I'd taken it, but also defensive because she'd started it. I was still angry at Dina for stealing my ideas, but I was also angry at myself for stooping to her level. It was this messy mix of emotions that didn't feel as good as I thought revenge would feel. I kept remembering Dina crying on the phone about her house and feeling sick about it. But then I'd remember her showing off my designs as her own, and the anger would come back. Mom said that's what revenge does. It doesn't actually make you feel better. It just creates more mess that you have to live with. When I flew home, Alex picked me up from the airport and told me he'd been talking to his parents. They wanted to have a family meeting to address everything that had happened. My stomach dropped because a family meeting sounded like my worst nightmare. Sitting in a room with Dina and Roy and Alex's parents while everyone discussed how I'd sabotaged Dina's house. But Alex said avoiding it wouldn't make anything better, and we needed to deal with this as a family. I agreed even though I wanted to run back to Florida and hide at Mom's house forever. We set the meeting for Sunday at his parents' place. The day of the meeting, I changed clothes 3 times because nothing felt right. Alex and I drove over in silence, and I felt sick the whole way there. When we walked in, Dina was already crying, and Roy looked confused about why we were all gathered. Alex's parents sat on the couch looking serious and uncomfortable. Everyone settled into chairs around the living room, and nobody knew how to start. The silence stretched out until it felt suffocating. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall and someone's stomach gurgling. Finally, Alex's dad cleared his throat and said we needed to talk about what had been happening between Dina and me. He turned to Dina and asked her directly why she'd been copying my house. Dina's face crumpled and she started sobbing. She said she'd always felt inferior to me because I had natural creativity and style while she just had money. She said she didn't know how to make things beautiful on her own, so she copied what I did. Roy put his arm around her looking shocked like he'd never heard any of this before. Dina said every time she walked into my house she felt inadequate because everything looked so perfect and personal. She wanted people to admire her the way they admired me, but she didn't know how to create that herself. So she just copied everything and made it more expensive, thinking that would make it better. Dina kept talking through her tears. She said she thought if she upgraded my designs with expensive materials, people would think she was creative and sophisticated. She never stopped to think about how it made me feel because she was too focused on her own need for validation. She said she wanted her friends to walk into her house and be impressed. She wanted them to ask where she got her ideas and compliment her taste. She was so caught up in trying to feel good about herself that she never considered my perspective at all. Hearing her admit this made me realize she'd been completely self-absorbed the entire time. It wasn't that she didn't care about hurting me. She literally never thought about me at all. I took a breath and started explaining my side. I told them how violated I felt watching Dina steal my ideas month after month, How she'd take something I'd spent weeks planning and recreate it in a weekend with expensive upgrades. How she'd show it off to everyone like she'd invented it herself. How Alex kept dismissing my concerns and making me feel crazy for being upset. I explained that I felt invisible and powerless watching someone take credit for my creativity. Dina looked genuinely shocked as I talked. Her eyes got wider and she kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe I'd felt that strongly. I realized in that moment that she'd been so trapped in her own insecurity that she never once considered what the copying was doing to me. She'd seen me as this person who had everything together, not as someone who could be hurt by her actions. Roy turned to look at Dina, and then back at me, and his face went bright red. He started shifting in his seat and rubbing the back of his neck. He said he honestly thought Dina just loved decorating and had finally found her passion. He never questioned where any of the ideas came from because she seemed so excited about everything. He admitted he bragged about the costs because it made him feel successful to show everyone how much they could afford. He looked down at his hands and said he should have paid more attention to what was actually happening instead of just writing checks. Alex's mom leaned forward in her chair and looked straight at me. She asked me directly if I sabotaged Dina's house on purpose. The whole room went quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for my answer. I took a deep breath and said yes. I told them about the magazines and the pineapple lamp and the orange paint and the clown room. I explained how I planned everything over months to get revenge for the copying. Alex's parents just sat there processing what I said. His mom's mouth was hanging open slightly. His dad was gripping the armrest of his chair. I could see them realizing I was capable of months of calculated planning to humiliate their daughter. Dina looked like I'd slapped her. Dina's face crumpled and tears started running down her cheeks again. She said she couldn't believe I would do something so mean on purpose. She said I deliberately humiliated her and made her look stupid in front of everyone. She was right. I apologized for taking it as far as I did, but I also told her that her copying was a violation too. I explained that she stole my creativity and my identity and took credit for all my ideas. I said she needed to understand that what she did was wrong, even if my revenge was also wrong. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve and nodded, but she looked destroyed. Alex cleared his throat and everyone turned to look at him. He said he failed both of us by not taking the situation seriously from the start. He admitted that when I first told him about the copying, he dismissed it as no big deal. He said if he'd actually listened to me and helped address Dina's behavior early on, neither of us would have ended up doing what we did. He looked at Dina and then at me, and said he was sorry for making both of us feel like we had to handle this alone. His voice cracked a little when he said it. Alex's dad sat forward and put his elbows on his knees. He looked at Dina and said she needed to work on figuring out who she actually is. He said she's been comparing herself to other people her whole life and it's making her miserable. He told her she has so much going for her, but she can't see it because she's too busy looking at what everyone else has. He said he would pay for therapy to help her understand why she feels so bad about herself despite having money and a nice house and people who love her. His voice was gentle but firm. Dina took a shaky breath and said she would go to therapy. She turned to me and apologized for copying everything. She said she was sorry for stealing my ideas and taking credit for them. Her apology sounded real but also incredibly sad. I could see her starting to understand how weird her behavior was, and it was crushing her. She kept saying she didn't realize how bad it had gotten. She looked smaller somehow, like she was shrinking into herself. Roy put his arm around her and she leaned into him. I apologized again, and this time I really meant it. I told Dina I was sorry for the revenge and for deliberately hurting her. I said I could see now how much damage I caused and it went way too far. I still thought her copying was wrong, but I recognized that my response was mean and out of proportion. I said I should have just talked to her directly instead of planning this whole elaborate scheme. She nodded and wiped her eyes again. The room felt heavy with all the things we'd done to each other. Roy spoke up and said he was sorry too. He apologized for enabling Dina by funding everything without asking questions. He admitted he liked showing off their expensive house to people. He said he didn't care where the ideas came from as long as their friends were impressed. He realized now that he made everything worse by just throwing money at whatever Dina wanted. He said he should have noticed something was wrong and helped her work through it instead of just buying more stuff. Alex's mom suggested we needed clear boundaries going forward. We all agreed that Dina wouldn't copy my designs anymore and I wouldn't sabotage her house. Dina said she would work with a professional interior designer to develop her own style. I promised to stop leaving fake design magazines around when she visited. We talked about how we could rebuild trust and have a healthier relationship. It felt like we were all trying to figure out how to move past this mess we'd created. The conversation was awkward but necessary. Dina suddenly remembered the clown statue and her face went pale. She said the $12,000 statue from Japan was still coming in about a month. She looked at me and asked if I would help her figure out what to actually do with her basement. I was surprised she wanted my help after everything, but I could see it was her way of trying to start over and maybe learn to develop her own taste. I agreed to help her. It felt like a chance to do something constructive instead of destructive for once. Our first meeting happened 3 days later at a coffee shop near her house. Dina showed up with a huge binder full of magazine clippings and Pinterest screenshots, all of them showing my style copied back at me. She set the binder on the table between us and opened it to a page covered in neutral beiges and grays. I could feel my jaw getting tight just looking at it. She asked where we should start with the basement, and I told her we needed to figure out what she actually liked first, not what she thought looked good. She looked confused and flipped through more pages of the binder, all showing variations of my aesthetic. I closed the binder and asked her what her favorite color was, without thinking about what anyone else would say. She stared at me for a long moment and then said purple, but like a deep jewel-tone purple, almost like an amethyst. I watched her face change as she said it, like she was admitting something embarrassing. She added that she also loved bright teal and coral and gold, then stopped herself and said those colors probably wouldn't work together. I told her they absolutely would work together if we did it right. She looked doubtful, but also a little excited. We spent the next hour going through design magazines, and I watched her gravitating toward the boldest, most colorful rooms while apologizing for liking them. Every time she pointed at something vibrant, she would say it was too much or too loud or too childish. I started understanding that she had been trained to think her natural taste was wrong somehow. She told me Roy always said their house should look expensive and sophisticated, which apparently meant neutral and boring. I asked her what she would do if money and other people's opinions didn't matter at all. She got quiet, and then started describing this maximalist dream space with jewel tones and patterns and collections of weird, interesting objects displayed everywhere. Her whole face lit up as she talked. It was completely different from anything in my house, and I felt relieved and also kind of sad for her. Our second meeting was at a furniture store where I made her point at things she liked without explaining or justifying her choices. She kept trying to talk herself out of her picks, but I wouldn't let her. She chose a velvet sofa in sapphire blue, chairs with bright geometric patterns, a coffee table with gold legs. Everything she selected was bold and interesting and nothing like the neutral copies filling her house. She looked nervous the whole time, like she was doing something wrong. When we left, she thanked me for not judging her taste, and I realized she had been expecting me to tell her she was wrong about what she liked. The third meeting happened at her house where we measured the basement and talked about layout. She wanted to knock down a wall to make the space more open, but was worried Roy would think it was a waste of money. I told her it was her house too, and she should make it how she wanted it. She looked at me like I had said something revolutionary. We started sketching out ideas, and she got more confident with each suggestion. She wanted a gallery wall with dozens of frames in different sizes and colors. She wanted open shelving to display her collection of vintage teacups that she had been hiding in boxes because Roy thought they looked cluttered. She wanted a reading nook with a hanging chair and bright cushions. Everything she described was joyful and personal and completely her own vision. I found myself getting excited about her project in a way I never expected. Watching her discover her own taste felt better than any revenge had felt. Alex and I went to our first therapy appointment on a Tuesday evening after I spent the whole day feeling sick with worry about it. The therapist's office was in this old house converted into professional spaces, and the waiting room smelled like lavender. Alex held my hand while we waited, and I could feel how nervous he was too. The therapist was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, and she had us sit on opposite ends of a couch, which felt symbolic. She asked us why we were there, and Alex looked at me, so I started explaining about Dina's copying and my revenge and the family meeting. It took almost 20 minutes to get through the whole story, and by the end the therapist was taking notes pretty fast. She asked Alex how he felt about everything, and he said he felt guilty for not supporting me better at the beginning. He admitted he had minimized my feelings because dealing with his sister's issues seemed too hard. The therapist asked why it seemed too hard, and Alex got quiet. He eventually said his family had always treated Dina like she was fragile, and he had learned to just go along with whatever kept the peace. She asked him if keeping the peace was more important than supporting his wife, and he said no, but his actions had suggested otherwise. That hit him hard, and I could see him processing it. Then she turned to me and asked if I felt satisfied with my revenge now that time had passed. I told her the truth, that it had felt good initially, but now mostly felt complicated and kind of hollow. She asked what I had really wanted from the revenge, and I realized I had wanted Dina to feel as powerless and violated as I had felt. The therapist pointed out that I had succeeded in that goal, but it had damaged my marriage and family relationships in the process. She asked if there had been other ways to feel powerful again without hurting Dina, and I admitted there probably were, but I had been too angry to think of them. We spent the rest of the session talking about communication, and how Alex and I could better support each other during family conflicts. She gave us homework to practice having difficult conversations about his family without either of us shutting down or getting defensive. Walking out of there, I felt exhausted, but also lighter somehow. Orion called me the day after I posted about Dina's basement plans on social media. He said he had been following the whole situation with fascination and wanted to help Dina find her style as a professional courtesy. I was surprised because Orion usually charged thousands of dollars for consultations, but he said this was too interesting to pass up. He explained that he loved helping people discover their authentic aesthetic after years of following rules or copying others. I gave him Dina's number and warned him that she was pretty insecure about her taste. He laughed and said insecurity was his specialty. A week later, Dina called me almost crying with happiness because Orion had spent 3 hours with her going through her whole house and validating all her secret color preferences. She said he told her she had maximalist tendencies that she had been suppressing with neutral minimalism. He had her take a style quiz and look through hundreds of images to identify patterns in what made her excited. Apparently, she scored highest for eclectic maximalism with jewel tone preferences and global influences. She sounded amazed that there were actual design terms for what she liked. Orion had also told her that her natural style was actually harder to execute well than minimalism because it required more confidence and curation skills. That had made her feel better about years of thinking her taste was somehow wrong or unsophisticated. He gave her homework to visit antique stores and thrift shops to start collecting pieces that spoke to her without worrying about whether they matched anything else. She was supposed to trust her gut reactions instead of overthinking every choice. When she told me all this, I could hear how excited she was, and it made me genuinely happy for her. Orion texted me later saying Dina had incredible natural taste that had been completely buried under insecurity and competition. He said helping her was going to be one of his favorite projects. Dina's therapy sessions were happening twice a week, and she started opening up to me about what she was learning. We were at another coffee shop meeting about the basement when she told me her therapist had helped her realize the copying started way back in childhood. She said she and Alex had always been compared to each other growing up, and she had felt like she was losing. Alex was naturally good at the school and sports and making friends while she had to work hard at everything. Her parents never meant to make it a competition, but they had constantly held Alex up as an example for her to follow. She said by the time they were teenagers, she had developed this pattern of watching what Alex did and trying to copy it, so she could finally be good enough. When Alex got married and bought a house and seemed happy, she had panicked because she couldn't figure out how to copy that kind of contentment. So she had started copying the physical things instead, thinking that would somehow make her feel as satisfied as I seemed to be. Her therapist was helping her understand that her self-worth had become completely dependent on external validation and comparison to others. She was working on building confidence in her own choices and learning to recognize her own preferences as valid, even when they were different from what other people liked. She told me it was hard work, and sometimes she caught herself about to copy something before stopping herself. I asked her what she did when that happened, and she said she tried to figure out what she would actually want if she wasn't comparing herself to anyone else. Sometimes the answer was the same thing, and sometimes it was completely different. The important part was making the choice consciously, instead of automatically copying. Hearing her talk about all this made me understand how deep her issues went, and how my revenge had probably made her insecurity even worse. I felt guilty about that, but also relieved that she was finally getting help. Roy showed up at our house one Saturday morning and asked to talk to Alex alone. They went out to the backyard and I watched them through the kitchen window for almost an hour. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Roy's body language shift from defensive to something more vulnerable. When they came back inside, Roy looked tired but also different somehow. Alex told me later that Roy had admitted he had been using money to solve problems instead of actually dealing with them. Every time Dina wanted something expensive, Roy had just paid for it without asking why she wanted it, or whether it would actually make her happy. He said constantly upgrading everything Dina copied had made him feel successful and powerful, but it was hollow because nothing was genuinely theirs. He had been showing off their expensive house to his gym clients and business partners, like it proved something about his worth. Alex said Roy was starting to realize that he had enabled Dina's copying because it gave him an excuse to spend money and feel important. Without the competition with me, Roy didn't know what their house should look like or what Dina actually wanted. He was scared that if they built something genuine together, it might not be impressive enough to show off. Alex had told him that was exactly the problem, and maybe they needed to stop performing their life for other people. Roy had agreed but said he didn't know how to stop after years of making everything about status and appearances. Alex suggested Roy talk to someone too, and Roy had actually agreed. Hearing all this made me see Roy differently. I had thought he was just carelessly throwing money around, but he had his own issues with self-worth and validation. My mom flew in for a week and I picked her up from the airport on a Wednesday. She had been getting updates from me about everything that happened, but she wanted to see how things were going in person. The first thing she said when she got in the car was that I looked less stressed than the last time she visited. I told her about the therapy and the basement project with Dina, and how things were slowly getting better. She smiled and said she was proud of me for helping Dina instead of staying angry. We stopped at Dina's house on the way home because Dina had asked to meet my mom. I was nervous about it, but Dina greeted us warmly and showed my mom the basement progress. The clown stuff was all gone and the walls were painted this gorgeous deep purple. Dina had found an amazing vintage rug in coral and gold that tied the whole color scheme together. My mom complimented everything, and Dina actually accepted the compliments instead of deflecting them. Then Dina asked if my mom had time to talk privately, and my mom said yes. They went into the kitchen, and I stayed in the basement looking at paint samples. I could hear their voices, but not their words. They were in there for almost 45 minutes. When they came out, my mom was holding Dina's hand, and Dina's eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling. On the drive home, my mom told me she had shared her own stories about feeling inadequate as a young wife and mother. She said when she married my dad, she had felt like she was competing with his successful career and interesting life. She had tried to make herself into what she thought a good wife should be instead of figuring out who she actually was. It had taken her years to develop confidence in her own identity and stop comparing herself to other women. She had told Dina that the comparison trap was something a lot of women struggled with, and Dina wasn't alone or broken. My mom said Dina had cried with relief at hearing that. I felt grateful that my mom had been willing to be vulnerable with Dina like that. Catalina called me out of nowhere on a Sunday afternoon and asked if we could meet for coffee. We had never hung out one-on-one before, so I was curious. She picked a place halfway between our houses and was already there when I arrived. She ordered us both lattes and then said she needed to tell me something. She explained that she had been relieved when the copying stopped because watching it had made her really uncomfortable. She said she had tried to hint to Dina that copying my house was weird, but Dina had gotten so defensive that Catalina couldn't get through to her. Every time Catalina suggested Dina develop her own style, Dina had acted like Catalina was attacking her. Eventually, Catalina had stopped trying because it was damaging their friendship. She said she had felt guilty for not pushing harder, but she also hadn't known what else to do. I told her I didn't blame her because Dina clearly hadn't been ready to hear it. Catalina said she was glad everything had come out in the open, even though the way it happened was messy. She admitted she had suspected I had something to do with the clown basement because it was so wildly different from my usual taste. I asked if she thought I was a terrible person, and she laughed and said no, just creative with her revenge. She said Dina had needed a wake-up call, and conventional approaches clearly weren't working. We ended up talking for 2 hours about design and families and the weird dynamics that develop between women. By the end, I felt like I had made an actual friend instead of just my sister-in-law's friend. Catalina said she hoped we could hang out more now that things were less tense. 3 months after the family meeting, I got a text from Dina with a photo attached. The basement was completely finished, and it looked incredible. The purple walls were covered with a gallery wall of frames in gold and coral and teal, each one holding art or photos or vintage prints she had collected. The velvet sofa looked perfect against the wall, and the geometric chairs created a conversation area that felt both sophisticated and fun. She had installed floating shelves displaying her teacup collection, and each one was lit with small spotlights. The reading nook had the hanging chair she wanted with bright patterned cushions and a floor lamp shaped like a palm tree. There was a bar cart in the corner with colorful glassware and a record player on a credenza playing vinyl. Every single element was bold and joyful and completely Dina. Nothing about it looked like my house or anyone else's house. It was purely her own vision executed beautifully. I texted back that it looked amazing, and I meant it completely. She called me immediately, and I could hear how happy she was. She said Orion had helped her with the final styling, but all the major choices were hers. She felt proud of it in a way she had never felt proud of the copied rooms. This space represented who she actually was instead of who she thought she should be. She was having a party the next weekend to show it off, and she wanted me and Alex to come. I told her we would definitely be there. The weekend of the party arrived, and Alex and I drove over to their house around 7. Cars already lined the street, and I could hear music coming from inside. We walked through the front door, and Dina greeted us with actual excitement instead of her usual fake enthusiasm. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the basement stairs. The space looked even better in person than it had in photos. The purple walls made the whole room feel cozy but energetic. The gallery wall had probably 50 frames in different sizes and shapes, all mixed together in this organized chaos that somehow worked perfectly. Her teacup collection sat on floating shelves with tiny spotlights making each piece glow. The velvet sofa looked comfortable and inviting instead of trying too hard. The geometric chairs created conversation areas that invited people to sit and stay. Dina's friends wandered around holding wine glasses and actually looking impressed instead of confused. I watched her walk through explaining each choice, and this time she was honest about the process. She told them about working with Orion to figure out what she actually liked. She admitted she'd been copying other people's styles for years because she didn't trust her own taste. She said this was the first room that felt like it belonged to her, instead of being borrowed from someone else's vision. Her friends asked questions and complimented specific choices, and Dina glowed with genuine pride. I stood near the bar cart watching her interact with everyone and felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't the competitive desperation I'd watched for months. This was real happiness about creating something that reflected who she actually was. Catalina found me by the record player, and we talked about the transformation. She said she'd known Dina since college, and this basement felt more authentic than anything she'd seen her do before. We watched Dina show someone her vinyl collection, and Catalina's voice got quiet. She walked over to Dina, and I followed close enough to hear. Catalina touched one of the frames on the gallery wall and told Dina this was the first time her house felt like it reflected who she actually was. Dina's eyes filled up immediately, and she pulled Catalina into a hug. Then she turned to me and thanked me for helping her figure out what she really liked, instead of just copying what looked good. Her voice cracked when she said it, and I felt my own throat get tight. I told her the room was beautiful, and I meant it completely. She squeezed my hand and went back to her guests, but I could see her wiping her eyes. The party lasted another 3 hours, and I watched Dina soak up compliments that were actually earned this time. People kept asking about Orion, and she gave him full credit for helping her develop confidence in her choices. She showed everyone photos of the clown basement on her phone and laughed about how lost she'd been. By the end of the night, her face hurt from smiling, and she hugged me goodbye with real warmth instead of performance. Alex and I had been going to therapy every week for several months by then. The sessions were hard at first because we had to talk about all the ways we'd failed each other during the copying situation. He admitted he'd dismissed my feelings because dealing with his sister's issues felt too complicated. I admitted I'd gone behind his back with the revenge because I didn't trust him to support me. Our therapist helped us see the patterns we'd developed over years of avoiding conflict. We learned to address family issues immediately, instead of letting them build up until someone exploded. Alex got better at supporting me even when it meant confronting his family about uncomfortable things. I got better at telling him when I felt unsupported instead of assuming he didn't care. We practiced having hard conversations in session until they felt less scary in real life. The work was exhausting, but our relationship felt stronger than it had in years. We could talk about Dina without it turning into a fight. We could disagree about family stuff without one of us shutting down. The therapy gave us tools to handle problems before they became disasters. My relationship with my in-laws took longer to repair. They were polite when we saw them, but there was awkwardness under everything. They appreciated that I'd helped Dina with the basement after everything exploded. My mother-in-law told me it showed I was willing to move past the conflict in a constructive way. My father-in-law made jokes about the clown room that felt a little pointed but mostly friendly. They invited us to family dinners and made an effort to include me in conversations. But I could feel them being careful around me, like they weren't sure what I might do next. I didn't blame them because I'd shown them a side of myself that was calculating and vengeful. They'd watched me systematically destroy their daughter's house and mental state over months. That wasn't something people forgot quickly, even if they understood why it happened. We were rebuilding trust slowly through consistent positive interactions. It would probably take years before things felt completely normal again. Dina started meeting with Orion professionally to redesign other parts of her house. She wanted to replace the copied rooms with spaces that reflected her actual personality. They worked on her living room first, stripping out all the expensive versions of my furniture. Dina picked bold patterns and mixed metals and bright accent colors that I never would have chosen. She sent me progress photos and asked for feedback, and I gave her honest opinions. The living room came together as this eclectic, joyful space that felt completely different from my neutral, cozy aesthetic. Orion helped her develop confidence in her choices by explaining why certain combinations worked. Dina learned about color theory and scale and how to mix patterns without making things look chaotic. She got excited about finally having a home that reflected her personality instead of being an expensive copy of someone else's taste. She told me she wished she'd done this years ago instead of wasting time and money copying other people. Roy called me one afternoon and asked if we could talk. He came over to our house and we sat in the sunroom with coffee. He looked uncomfortable but determined. He admitted he'd been threatened by my creativity because Dina was always comparing herself to me. He said every time she copied something from my house, she'd talk about how naturally style came to me while she had to work at it. He felt like he couldn't compete with that, so he just threw money at whatever she wanted. He'd thought buying expensive versions would make her feel better about herself, but it just made the problem worse. He was working on supporting her actual interests instead of just funding her copying. He'd started asking her why she liked things instead of just paying for them. He was learning to recognize when she was choosing something because she genuinely loved it, versus when she was copying someone else. He apologized for his part in enabling her behavior, and for all the bragging about costs. He said he'd been showing off because it made him feel successful, but he understood now how obnoxious it was. I started a design blog to share my ideas publicly. It felt like reclaiming my creativity in a positive way, instead of hiding it because someone might copy. I posted photos of my house and explained my design process and shared tips for decorating on a budget. The blog grew slowly but steadily, and I loved connecting with people who appreciated my aesthetic. Dina was one of my first followers and commented supportively on my posts. She'd write things about how she loved my style even though it was different from hers now. She'd share my posts with her friends and recommend my blog to people asking for design advice. Seeing her support my creativity publicly felt like real progress. It showed she'd moved past the competition and could celebrate my work without feeling threatened. The blog became this space where I could express my ideas without worrying about someone stealing them and claiming credit. Alex's parents invited us to Sunday dinner a few weeks later. We sat around their dining table with Dina and Roy, and his parents made a point of complimenting both houses. His mom said my house had this warm, welcoming feeling that made everyone comfortable. His dad said Dina's new basement was bold and exciting and showed real personality. They emphasized how both styles were beautiful in completely different ways. It was their way of acknowledging that there was room for both of us to have our own aesthetics. They didn't have to choose between us or declare one house better than the other. The conversation felt forced at first, but gradually relaxed into something more natural. We talked about Dina's progress with Orion and my blog and Alex's work. By dessert, it almost felt like old Sunday dinners before everything got complicated. Dina asked if she could talk to me privately after dinner. We went out to her parents' back porch and sat on the steps. She told me therapy had helped her realize she was trying to become me because she didn't know who she was. She said she'd spent her whole life comparing herself to other people and feeling inadequate. Copying my house had been the most obvious example, but it was part of a bigger pattern. She was grateful that my revenge, as painful as it was, forced her to confront her issues instead of continuing to hide behind copied designs. She said the clown basement had been so humiliating that she couldn't ignore her problems anymore. She'd had to face why she was willing to spend $40,000 on something she didn't even like just because she thought I liked it. The therapy was helping her build an identity based on her actual preferences, instead of what she thought would impress people. I admitted to Dina that I took the revenge too far because I felt powerless and wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me. I told her I could have confronted her directly, or talked to Alex's parents, or just stopped inviting her over. Instead, I chose the most hurtful option, because I wanted her to suffer. I said I wasn't proud of spending months plotting her humiliation even though I understood why I did it. We were both learning that there were better ways to handle the situation, but we couldn't change the past. We could only move forward differently by being honest about our feelings and respecting each other's boundaries. Dina said she forgave me for the revenge, and I told her I forgave her for the copying. We sat there on the porch steps for a long time, not saying anything, just existing in this weird space between our old relationship and whatever came next. 4 months after the family meeting, Dina called me from a coffee shop near her house. She said she and Roy had been talking about selling and building something new from scratch with Orion's help. She wanted a house that was genuinely theirs from the beginning instead of spending years fixing what had turned into a monument to her copying problem. The decision felt huge to her because it meant admitting that her beautiful, expensive house had never really been hers at all. She asked if I thought she was crazy for wanting to start over, and I told her it was probably the healthiest choice she could make. Roy was on board because he was tired of living in a space that reminded him of his role in enabling her issues. They'd already talked to a realtor and had a contractor lined up to start design plans. Orion was excited to help them create something that reflected Dina's actual taste instead of her copied version of mine. She sounded nervous, but also more energized than I'd heard her in months. I went over to help Dina pack up her house a few weeks later when the sale went through faster than expected. We started in the living room and immediately came across the 6-foot pineapple lamp with the hula skirt shade. Dina looked at it for a long moment and then started laughing, so hard she had to sit down on her Italian leather couch. She said she couldn't believe she'd paid $800 for something so hideous just because she thought I liked it. I admitted the whole famous dead artist story was completely made up, and she laughed even harder. We loaded it into her car to donate to the thrift store where it would probably terrify some other unsuspecting person. She said someday she'd be able to laugh about the clown basement too, but she wasn't quite there yet. The basement was still completely intact with its circus posters and red and white striped walls because she couldn't bear to deal with it before moving. We avoided going down there while we packed, which felt like an unspoken agreement between us. The rest of the packing went surprisingly well considering how weird the situation was. Dina kept finding things she'd copied from me, and we'd pause to talk about why she bought each one. The custom plates that matched my vintage ones, the velvet dining chairs, the handmade Italian tiles. Each item became a little moment of honesty about her insecurity and my revenge. Alex and I hosted Thanksgiving at our house that year, and for the first time in months, it felt relaxed and genuine. Dina arrived on time carrying a dish she'd created herself instead of copying one of my recipes. It was this wild mushroom and goat cheese tart that looked nothing like anything I would make. Everyone noticed and complimented her originality, which made her smile in a way that seemed more real than her usual pleased expression. Roy brought wine and didn't mention how much it cost even once during the entire evening. My parents flew in from Florida, and my dad spent 20 minutes talking to Alex about work stuff while my mom helped me in the kitchen. Alex's parents arrived with rolls and this nervous energy like they weren't sure if everything was really okay between all of us. But dinner itself was easy and comfortable. We talked about Dina's new house plans and my blog and Roy's business expansion. Catalina came too since she'd become part of our family gatherings, and she told funny stories about Dina's therapy breakthroughs that made everyone laugh. The clown basement didn't come up at all. Neither did the copying or the revenge. We just existed together as a family that had been through something difficult and come out the other side. My mom pulled me aside while I was getting dessert ready in the kitchen. She said she was proud of how I handled the aftermath, even though the revenge itself was questionable. Her exact words were that making things right after you've done wrong is harder than not doing wrong in the first place. I told her I was still working on figuring out if I was proud of what I did or ashamed of it. She said it was probably both, and that was okay because most complicated situations don't have clean emotional answers. She'd watched Dina at dinner and noticed how much more comfortable she seemed in her own skin. My mom thought the whole situation, as messy as it was, had forced growth that might not have happened otherwise. I asked if that made the revenge worth it, and she said she couldn't answer that for me. She reminded me that intentions and outcomes are two different things, and I'd have to decide for myself if the pain I caused was justified by the change it created. Then she handed me the pie, and we went back to the dining room where everyone was laughing at something Roy said. Dina's new house plans arrived by email a week later, and I opened them on my laptop at the kitchen table. They were completely different from mine in every possible way. Modern and bold where mine was traditional and cozy. Sharp, clean lines instead of my curved furniture and soft textures. A color palette of blacks and whites and deep jewel tones instead of my neutrals and pastels. Floor-to-ceiling windows instead of my smaller traditional ones. An open concept layout instead of my defined rooms. Watching her get excited about her own vision without any reference to my choices felt like the real resolution to everything that happened. She'd sent the plans with a message asking what I thought, and I could tell from her words that she genuinely wanted feedback, not validation. She wasn't asking if I liked her style. She was asking if I thought her ideas worked well together for the space she was creating. That difference meant everything. I wrote back with genuine enthusiasm about her bold choices and suggested a few small tweaks to the layout that I thought would improve flow. She responded within minutes, thanking me and saying she loved the suggestions. Catalina and I started meeting for coffee every few weeks after Thanksgiving. We'd bonded over our shared experience of watching the copying situation spiral out of control from different perspectives. She told me she was glad I finally did something about it, even if my methods were extreme. She'd noticed the copying early on, but didn't know how to bring it up with Dina without damaging their friendship. She'd tried dropping hints about how similar Dina's house looked to mine, but Dina would get defensive and change the subject. Catalina admitted she'd been relieved when everything exploded because it meant the issue was finally out in the open where it could be addressed. She'd encouraged Dina to stick with therapy even when Dina wanted to quit after the first few sessions. Now she was watching Dina develop actual confidence in her own taste, and it felt like meeting a different version of her best friend. We talked about other stuff too. Normal friend stuff about work and relationships and plans. But the copying situation had created this foundation of honesty between us that made the friendship feel real from the start. Roy's business partner Sanjay came to one of our Sunday dinners in December. He'd been traveling for work during most of the drama and was catching up on everything that happened. Halfway through dinner, he mentioned that he'd noticed the copied decor months ago when he'd visited both houses for different events. He said he didn't say anything at the time because it seemed like a family issue that wasn't his place to address. His comment made me realize that other people saw what was happening, which validated that I wasn't crazy for being upset. Alex's dad asked Sanjay what he'd thought when he noticed the similarities, and Sanjay said honestly it had made him uncomfortable. He'd wondered if Dina was okay because the copying seemed obsessive in a way that suggested something deeper was wrong. Roy looked embarrassed and admitted he'd been so focused on affording the expensive versions that he never stopped to question why Dina wanted to copy everything in the first place. Sanjay's outside perspective helped everyone see the situation more clearly as something that had affected more than just me and Dina. 6 months after everything exploded, Alex and I were stronger as a couple because we learned to fight productively and support each other through family drama. We'd figured out how to disagree without dismissing each other's feelings, which had been our biggest problem during the copying situation. Alex was better at recognizing when his family's behavior was affecting me, and I was better at bringing up issues directly instead of letting them build into resentment. Our couples therapy sessions had given us tools for handling conflict that we used regularly. The whole situation tested our marriage in ways I didn't expect, but it made us more resilient. We trusted each other more because we'd survived something difficult together. Alex said he was grateful in a weird way that everything happened, because it forced us to develop communication skills we probably wouldn't have built otherwise. I agreed, even though I still wished we'd found a less painful way to learn those lessons. Dina sent me a photo of her new house's design plans one afternoon, with a message asking for my honest opinion. The plans had evolved since the first version she'd shown me, with more details and refinements. I loved that she was confident enough now to ask for feedback without worrying that I'd judge her, or that she was copying me. The plans showed a house that was completely her own vision, bold and modern and nothing like mine. I studied them carefully and noticed a few spots where small changes would improve the flow or functionality. I sent her detailed thoughts about the kitchen layout and the master bathroom design and the placement of windows in the living room. She wrote back immediately thanking me and saying this was what she wished our relationship had been like from the beginning. I gave Dina genuine feedback on her plans over the next few days as she refined the designs. My suggestions were about enhancing her vision rather than changing it to match mine, which felt like an important distinction. She'd ask specific questions about whether a certain color combination worked or if a furniture arrangement made sense, and I'd respond with honest thoughts that respected her aesthetic choices. She thanked me repeatedly and said having my support meant everything to her. She told me she'd been terrified to share the plans because part of her worried I'd think she was copying again, even though the designs were completely different. I assured her that these plans were obviously her own, and I was excited to see her create something that reflected who she actually was. She said this collaborative process was what she'd wanted all along but hadn't known how to ask for, so she'd taken the shortcut of just copying everything instead. My in-laws pulled me aside after one of our Sunday dinners about a month after Dina's house plans were finalized. We stood in their kitchen while everyone else watched TV in the living room. They thanked me for helping Dina discover who she actually was, instead of just copying other people. My mother-in-law said the journey was messy and painful for everyone, but the result was worth it. She admitted they'd spent years comparing Dina to other people, especially me, without realizing how much damage it caused. My father-in-law said they'd always praised my creativity and style in front of Dina, which made her feel like she could never measure up. They'd created the insecurity that drove all the copying behavior. I told them I appreciated their honesty, and that we all played a part in what happened. The conversation felt like closure on something that had been weighing on all of us for months. Alex and I talked about it later that night while we cleaned up our kitchen. He suggested we host a housewarming party for Dina and Roy once their new house was built. The idea felt perfect, like coming full circle from where everything started. Dina should have celebrated my creativity when we had our housewarming instead of taking notes to copy everything. Now we could celebrate her genuine creativity and her own vision without any copying or competition between us. I loved the symbolism of it, and told Alex we should make it a big party with all our family and friends. He smiled and said it would show everyone that we'd moved past the drama and become a stronger family because of it. I spent some time thinking about everything that happened over the past year. The whole experience taught me something important about creativity and violation. Having my ideas copied didn't make them less valuable or diminish my creativity in any way. But it did violate something personal, like someone was stealing part of my identity and passing it off as their own. The revenge gave me satisfaction for a little while, but that feeling faded quickly and left me feeling guilty and small. Helping Dina find her own style gave me something much better, a lasting peace that came from doing the right thing even after I'd done so many wrong things. Our family relationships were stronger now because we'd all learned to communicate better and set proper boundaries with each other. 8 months had passed since the clown basement reveal that started everything unraveling. I was genuinely happy with how things turned out, even though the path to get here was messy and painful. Dina had her own identity now and was excited about creating a home that reflected who she actually was. Alex and I were stronger as a couple because we'd learned to fight productively and support each other through family drama. Our whole family had better boundaries and healthier communication patterns that would serve us well for years to come. The path was messy, and I wasn't proud of everything I did during my revenge campaign. But we all grew from the experience and came out better people on the other side. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most important things about ourselves and the people we love.